Hello and welcome to our Gower Society youth activity funded by the Gower Society. Now, because lockdown has been eased, we can actually get out and about in the Gower countryside. But we don't want to meet up in large groups, so my activity today is for you to undertake whenever you like from this Saturday, so you do not have to meet up with large numbers. If you do meet up with another family, which is allowed, then make sure you do social distance. And if you find other people doing the treasure hunt at the same time, then please just make sure you stick to the guidelines. So our Gower Society youth activity is a photo treasure hunt set here in Oxwich. You will have to go onto the Nature Days Facebook page or the Nature Days blog to download a treasure map. This treasure map has got 20 locations that you have got to find. You don't have to do them all today. This treasure hunt is going to be open for the whole of the summer, so you could do a bit of it on Saturday, come back another day and keep doing it. You also need a photo clues. So these photo clues will help you to locate where you've got to go. And how this treasure hunt works is you use your treasure map to locate the different places. When you get there, find where the photo was taken and you do some re-photography. What that means is you stand with your family at the same spot where I took the photo and you take a selfie to show that you've actually been to that location. When you've got some relocation photos that you've taken of you, can you upload them onto Twitter, hashtag #OurGower and hashtag Nature Days so that we can have a look? And if we see that you've uploaded some, then I can send you a certificate that you've actually undertaken our treasure map. If you do get stuck, remember you always have your map, and if you always make your way towards the sea, you can always walk back along the beach. So don't worry about it. We're going to be focusing most of our clues on the beach or in the sand dune system, so in Oxwich Nature Reserve. Now, because it is a nature reserve, you can bring your dogs to this beach, but please keep them on the leads while you're using the nature reserve. And if they do make a mess, please clean up after them. We want to make sure that we don't leave any trace of our evidence that we've actually been here. We don't want to damage it. We just want to visit this wonderful environment and see what's living here and enjoy the environment. As you're exploring this environment, you have to make sure that you are safe. So just a few pointers to make sure you safely visit Oxwich. Now, Oxwich sand dune system can have some snakes on it, and especially if it's a sunny day, they can be basking up along the sand dunes. Now, don't worry, they won't hurt you, but if you are concerned, you can sing your way around the sand dune system or sing your way around your treasure hunt, and that will scare them off. Or you can use a stick and the vibrations will get them to slither off into the vegetation as well. But the best bit of advice is to stick to our footpaths, and then the footpaths will take you to all of the sites in our treasure hunt. So none of these are off the footpath. Your footpath will also keep you on track, and you can't really get lost because the footpath will always take you back to the beach or back to the car park where you started. Other risks you might have, there are some spiky plants. Again, they're quite obvious. If you touch them, you might spike yourself. But if you're not sure, if you don't want to get spiked, just don't touch any of the plants or animals. If you do touch any of the plants and animals, please be careful because, of course, this is a nature reserve and we want to preserve the biodiversity here. We want to make sure that anybody from Gower Society Youth who is actually going into this environment leaves no trace and doesn't damage the environment and actually leaves it in a better condition. So a really good thing that you can do while you're doing your treasure hunt, if you bring a plastic bag and some gloves, you could do a litter pick as you're doing it. And then not only have you enjoyed the environment, you've made it better for the next group of people who are going to come. So please think about having a positive impact on the environment you're exploring. If you are on the beach, when you're looking on the strand line, you may be picking up things like bits of seaweed. And again, there may be something nasty on the strand line. So just make sure you're careful for what you pick up. And once you've done any of the picking up, you go and wash your hands. You may find some horses on the reserve while you're walking around. Please keep your distance and don't feed them because they can bite. And stay away and try and give them a wide berth. So when you enter the car park for Oxwich Beach, you might have noticed the new classroom as you entered. But what you might not have known is there used to be another classroom here. So one of the treasure hunt photo spots I want you to find is within this woodland here, right next to the car park. because there is a commemorative plaque here. So have a look and see if you can find it. It's just off the path over here. Now it's quite hard to read now, but if you, on your paper, if you just scribble on the back on top of, with your paper on top of it, you might be able to make a rubbing and find out what it says. Start in the car park and head for the beach, which is your first photo stop. On the beach is where you'll find the strand line, which is the line of debris that's been deposited by the incoming tide. And on the strand line, you'll hopefully find some piles of dead seaweed. Now this is where you will find sandhoppers. And if you're very careful to lift up your seaweed, you should see them jumping about. There, see them all go? Now if you're very quick, you can pick one up. Oh, there's one there. There. So you can pick one up, and when you do place him in your hand, they usually play dead, like that one did not. So these sandhoppers feed on the dead organic matter on the strand line, and there were only one of two species that actually survive living in the strand line, and they are all. So if you manage to find a sandhopper, then underneath the seaweed, try and get one in your hand, because when you do pick them up, they do tend to play dead. Now, these are in the same family as the isopods, so the wood lice and the crustaceans like shrimps and prawns and things like that. So they've got lots and lots of legs. But of course, you'll watch and they jump really brilliantly. But they don't really have any directional control, so they're jumping all over the place. But they have a fantastic compass within them, so they can tell which direction the sea is. So if you do manage to catch one, just put it down and see if it heads to the sea. Because it is said that if you take them and put them in another beach, they will still go in the direction that the sea was on the beach where they came from. That may actually be inland. So they're not very good long distance travellers, but they're very good at finding their way to the sea. And they usually come out most of all during when the night comes and when the tide is out. And sometimes you go for an evening stroll and the tide is out, you'll see masses of them jumping around, heading towards the wetter sand down towards the sea. While you're standing on the beach, if you look over to your right while you're looking out at the sea, you'll see that there's a landslide in the hillside there. Now this happened in 2019 in February, and it's a huge impact on the landscape. It actually had a second landslide just last weekend on the 4th of July, so please don't get too close to it and do not climb near it. On the western end of Oxwich Bay, before you get to the landslide, there's some great rock pools. So if the tide's out, why don't you have an explore and see what you can find in the rock pools? If you want to identify what's there, have a look at the other Gower Society Youth rock pooling video. This is a moon jellyfish that I found alive inside one of the rock pools in Oxwich. Follow the beach away from the car park and away from the kiosk and the beach house. Head towards the sand dunes. So this is one entrance you can get to at the very far corner of the car park. Follow the path that runs parallel with the back of the beach. These are the yellow dunes. Past the information plinth and then past the main junction into the dunes and up the big sandy hill to the top of the dune. In the yellow dunes, near the front of the dunes, you might find these gorgeous flowers here, which are just out this time of year. Now the leaves probably remind you of another tree, and in case you didn't know, this is actually a sea holly. It's a sea holly perfectly adapted to live in the sand dunes because it's got these spiky leaves so it doesn't get eaten, but also if you look at the colour of them, they're not bright green, and that's to reflect the sunlight so they don't get sunburnt. We've also got these beautiful flowers here, and they are succulent. So if you're very careful and try not to stab yourself with one of the thorns, you can see that they've got thick leaves. And that means they're a bit like a cactus, and they can hold on to water inside them so that they don't dry out very quickly. And they're also a whiter colour, so they reflect more sunlight than they absorb, so that they can actually survive being in very exposed areas with low water content and high UV. This is the start of the Nature Reserve, which is managed by NRW, Natural Resources Wales, whereas the beach itself is owned and managed by the Penrice Estate. Now, Oxwich Bay is a very wide bay. Now, the reason it's here at all is because of the geology that's underlying our feet here. So what we've got here, to the east of us here, we've got limestone, and then to the west we've also got limestone. And in the middle there used to be a sink. So we used to have our two limestones here, which actually made what we call a syncline, and on top of that was filled with another rock that infilled the syncline, and that was shale. Now, shale rock is very easy to erode, so the central part of that syncline was eroded, so that shale was taken away, leaving behind those two harder rocks, those two limestone bits, to create Oxwich Point and Tor Head over there, so the big great Tor. And then in between it you had a gap, and of course that gap's not going to stay there. The sea has encroached on there. Now, after a while the sea was actually a much further in than we have now, because we had that deposition from the sea dropping lots of sand. And initially we wouldn't have had sand here, we would have had a pebbly beach, and that pile of pebbles would have created this crescent shaped bay that we've got here. Now, after time, out there, our Helwick Bank, which is a big sandbank just out in the bay and just into the Bristol Channel, that would have provided all the material to create Oxwich Beach and the sand dune system behind it. So as we had storms and as we had the tide going out and the wind coming in, it blew that sand from a southwesterly direction onto the beach. It hit that obstacle that was that storm beach and started to pile up. Now, when you have large storms, that sand, which is very fine, can be taken further inland. And as it hits obstacles, it starts to create those mounds. But those mounds are not going to stay there for long, because the sand is going to blow even further inland unless you have plants starting to colonise it. So you start to have some specialist plants like the marram grass, this big spiky grass around us. This starts to colonise, great big long roots so it can hold the sand together. If it gets buried in sand, it doesn't matter, it grows even faster, and therefore it starts to stabilise those sand dunes, and then more plants can start to arrive. As those plants die, it creates a layer of organic matter that helps absorb water so that the water doesn't infiltrate down through the sand, making it a really dry environment. Starts to make the conditions a bit simpler and easier for all animals and all the plants to live on. So it's organic matter required, also water being held in the surface of the soil, in the sand there, and also the less shifting sand is going to help lots of species to survive, because most species get covered in sand and they'll just die. So as that progresses, you get this sand dune system. And that's why it's so different at the front of the sand dunes compared to the back of the sand dunes. If you look over at the back, you'll see much more variety of greens. You'll see some what we call climatic climax species, the top ones in our succession here, all these trees. Now, they wouldn't survive right in the front by the back of the beach, because there's not enough water, not enough organic matter, and the sand is shifting too much. From the back of the beach, we have that slow progression with less and less sand, more and more stability, more and more organic matter, more and more water being held in the sand. And the end result is we get a higher and higher diversity of plants and animals as we get further back into the dunes. Now, in the yellow dunes, not quite as close to the beach as you can get, but the first big set of dunes, we've got some blowouts, and that's what we've got behind me here. Now, this is created by erosion. Now, it can be a natural process, but usually it is created by some man-made influence at the beginning, which is not good. So here, for example, you can see we've got a fireplace here. So when this was covered in plants, what happened probably was somebody had a barbecue or had a fire at the top. That killed off the turf on the surface, and then that made a tiny bit of sand. And then the wind would come in and start to scour that sand and erode it and take away the sand. The plants around it wouldn't be able to survive, they would die, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger until we have this huge blowout here, where the wind can come whistling in and erode, and no longer do we have a dune. We have a dune with a great big gouge out of it, a great big bite, and this blowout here is basically the destruction of this sand dune. Now, over time, it should recolonise because you can get some more marram grass starting to grow here. But if people continue to come and have barbecues or jump or walk through it or destroy it with bikes or vehicles, then there's no way that it can actually recover. So if you look around, you can see wherever people are walking, like the paths, you can see there's like a long line that looks like a blowout. So every part where people get footprints or people erode through their feet, they're going to be creating a bit of damage. So when we visit the sand dunes, we should always make sure we stick to the path so that we limit the amount of damage we do to the plants there. Ironically, however, in the 1940s, this area was actually used for practicing the D-Day landings, and it had landing craft going on it. They threw bombs all over it, and of course it completely destroyed all the plants living here. And there was a big problem because they literally thought the sand dunes were going to blow away. And that was what's happening. All the sand was going away because there were no roots holding it here. So they decided in the 1970s they had to do something drastic about it. So they fenced it all off. They stopped allowing people to walk in it. They stopped allowing anybody to destroy it at all and allowed it to recover. And it did recover. And so after about 30 years, there were so many plants here that in fact it was getting too stable. Because all these plants that live in the sand dune systems near the front, at the back of the beach, they want the sand there. And if the sand can't move, they actually lose their advantage as an adapted species. So this marram grass that can survive when there's hardly any water, lots of shifting sand and low organic matter, suddenly can't outcompete things that you might find in your garden, like buttercups and grasses and also small shrubs and trees. So it ended up being that the sand dune system was actually turning into a woodland and we were losing all of our specialist plants. And they didn't know what to do about it. So they suddenly realised the answer was to let people in. So they took down the fences and they allowed access onto the sand dunes and people started to erode it. And that meant there was open bits of sand, and that meant those pioneer species could come back and colonise again. So in fact, there needed to be a balance of not allowing people in to destroy it too much, but also allowing them in a bit so that there was exposed sand, so we got some space for those pioneer species. Very difficult balance, but you do need to have a bit of erosion and a bit of safety for those plants in order to have all the species, all the available niches for all those species that are living here. Then it's back down the same side of the sand dune, through the kissing gate and along to the back of the grey dunes. Follow until you hit the crossroads with the path. As you follow your path, coming away from the front of the dunes by the beach, backwards towards the back of the dunes, you'll see that the type of vegetation here changed significantly. No longer do you have those really specialist species like that sea holly or that marram grass, and we end up with more species you might recognise. Lots of bracken here, lots of grasses and lots of dewberries. Now, dewberries look a bit like blackberries, but they're got bigger globules and they're a bit darker and they taste delicious. So if you can identify them, why don't you have a taste of them to keep you going? Now, when you get to this location here, you'll know you've got here because you'll come across the cockleshell path. Now, this cockleshell path was put here as using the byproduct from the cockle industry in North Gower, but it's an awfully good way of working out where you are. Because the cockleshell path, there's two of them. One of them that comes from the back of the car park all the way to the beach and heads up behind the toilets pretty much. But this one here that you're crossing is this main path here that's going through the centre of our back of our sand dunes. So if you follow this, you can get to the next fence line. But we don't want to follow this for very long because we're going to head to the very back. But in the meantime, we are going to follow it to find the next part of our treasure hunt, which is our very obscure concrete blocks. When you get to the cockleshell path, take a right and follow it until you dip down. Then take a right after the trees in the dip, follow the dip in the trees over a little burn, and on the other side you'll see the concrete blocks. Okay, now this is quite a hard spot to find. Now these concrete blocks, if you come from the beach and head straight inland following the footpath and go through the kissing gate, keep going past the slack on your left, then on your right there is a great big grassy hill. Now it is another dune, but this is a grey dune because it's not got as much sand exposed. It's one of the tallest dunes at the back of the sand dune system. Go up to the top and look down the other side, you'll see some more trees, and then behind them, just until we get to the other dune, you've got these concrete blocks. Now you might think, what on earth are they doing here? This is another remnant from World War II. So not only was this used for practicing the D-Day landings, it was also used as a decoy. Now Swansea was very important in the war because of the amount of industry and the coal and everything that was coming out of Swansea docks. So Swansea docks was a target for bombing. So to try and reduce the impact, what they tried to do is to make Oxwich look like Swansea. So they put up barrage balloons above the skies of Oxwich, and that hopefully detracted from any barrage balloons which were close to Swansea on the other side at Crumlin, and hopefully made the German bombers come here and try to bomb what they thought was Swansea, but in fact was Oxwich Nature Reserve. So these metal things on top of these concretes would have been flat against the ground, flush, like this one is, and that one would have been upright. It would have had a great big chain around here, going up to a barrage balloon which would have been about 5,000 feet up in the sky, and that would have been held on by a whole ring of these concrete blocks, and there would have been lots of them all the way around here, and any German bombers coming in across the sea would have seen them, thought that that signalled that this was Swansea. They'd have lights here as well, and then they would bomb this area, and it did work because Oxwich Beach and Oxwich Bay was bombed by the Germans, but Swansea of course was also completely devastated, but it tried to take the pressure off Swansea. So come and have a look at these concrete blocks because it's an amazing find, really proper treasure at Oxwich. Go back the way you came until you hit the cockleshell path again, then take a left until you hit the crossroads again, then take a right and then take a left again. Round you go, follow the grassy patch until you're on the path that runs parallel to the road. Keep following that until you see an exit to the right. As you come off the main sandy path and come along this little grassy one that takes you to the kissing gate, actually on the marsh road, don't forget to look to your left because you will, well, you probably won't see, there's something hidden here amongst the plants. Now you can go and explore, but do be careful because inside there is a building. And this is the old map room that was used during World War II for training and for surveying and things like that. So have a look. It's very hard to find out what it actually looks like because it's so overgrown, but I bet you didn't know there was a map room here. Make sure you take care when you're going across the road here to the bird hide. It may be quiet, but make sure you're looking both ways. Make sure nothing is coming as you cross over to the other side. Also, make sure you follow the country code and close the gates after you. Once across the road, follow the boardwalk all the way to the bird hide. Don't forget to have a look at that gorgeous sculpture on the way. How many birds can you spot? When you're entering the bird hide, make sure you're nice and quiet in case there's other people in there. So, when you found the bird hide, it's a good opportunity to have a little rest, have a little sit down and see what you can see. Now, looking through the windows, you might be able to see some amazing birds out there as well as some beautiful bulrushes, but don't forget to look inside the building as well. So if you look up above your head, you will see the remains of some swallows' nests. And if you're coming here in July, they will have fledged, but if you come at a different time of year, in May and June, you might actually see some swallows sitting on their nests. Also behind you, you may find you've seen some sightings. There's no sightings at the moment, but if people have seen anything interesting, it's on the board or it can be in the book as well. Best things to find here, if you're really lucky, you can see otters swimming around in the lake, but there's an awful lot of beautiful birds. And again, if you look at the identification guides on the side of the inside of the bird hide, see what you can spot. So maybe a pair of binoculars might be useful if you're definitely going to come and find this spot. So have a sit down, take some time and just enjoy the view out the window. Once you've finished in the bird hide, it's back the way you came, across the boardwalk, then through the 2 gates, across the road, careful of traffic, past the map room and turn left. Follow the path on the back that's parallel to the road. Keep following that till you get to your next photo stop, which is the signpost. There it is. Then keep going past the brown sign until you hit the pond. And there's 2 more photo opportunities for you to take your selfies as you go along. As you go past the signpost, you should see another sign for the boardwalk. Follow that sign, and before you get to the kissing gate, look to the left and you'll find the first part of our pond. Now at the back of the dunes, this whole area is covered in water, so be careful where you step. But this open piece of water is a great place to actually observe some of the pond animals. If you've got a net, you might want to bring it with you when you come to Oxwich, or you can just look at the surface. We've got lots of surface dwelling animals, things like pond skaters. You'll get lots of water boatmen coming up to the surface as well, and you'll also see some flies laying their eggs inside the water. Sometimes you can see dragonfly larvae crawling up onto the plants on the side, and also some damselflies and dragonflies flying around. Now, if you want to know more information about the kinds of animals you'll find inside ponds, then look at my River Animals YouTube video, and that tells you all about the kind of animals you find in a river. A lot of them you'll find in a pond as well. Next to the pond there's another metal kissing gate, follow that to the benches. As we head into another habitat here, we've got these lovely benches. So why not take some time to have a sit down and observe the habitats around you. This is a great spot to see dragonflies and damselflies. And again, if you've got a net and you want to bring it, there's another good dipping platform. So if you follow the platform here, it does stop, so don't go running along there because it will just stop in a dead end. It's a dipping platform, it's not a boardwalk. But if you kneel down or if you lie down flat there, you could probably find some amazing animals living in the pond that's underneath this boardwalk. This platform, however, is next to very deep water, so keep any children carefully alongside you and make sure you don't go over the edge. At the back of the dunes, you've got a huge extent of reed bed as well. So this habitat here is full of this, which is the common reed. And this used to be harvested to use for all the thatched cottages in the village. There's a lot less thatched cottages now, but it's still a fantastic habitat. And it's a great opportunity to listen, or if you're very lucky, to see some warblers, some really good birds. So they love to nest in amongst the reeds, because if you're going to disturb it, you literally have to swim through the reeds to actually get to any of those habitats. So it's a nice, safe place. Now these reeds can grow to about probably 10 foot tall. So in the winter, if you come here, they're brown, but then they'll grow up in 1 year all the way up to about 10 feet tall. And then they create really good hiding habitat for all those birds to actually hide in. These are used for roofing because inside they're hollow, which means they trap air. They're also, of course, waterproof. So if you get a big bundle of them together and put them on top of a roof, the water will flow down and also the air will keep the house very nice and warm. It's also a brilliant habitat for lots of invertebrates. So in amongst the plants, there's lots of water, and that water is going to be full of fish and lots of invertebrates like dragonfly nymphs, snails, leeches, and some diving beetles as well. Beyond the sand dunes, there is a meadow. Beyond the meadow, there should be a woodland, but we don't have a proper woodland here. We have a freshwater marsh. And the reason there is a freshwater marsh here is because Thomas Mansell Talbot in 1885 built a sea wall over at the far end beyond Nicholaston Pill to stop the sea from coming into what was a natural inlet of fresh water. And that allowed him to drain the land and to plant potatoes. However, since then, his descendants have not maintained the drains that have been required to take off all the surface water to keep it to be dry. So it started to create a new habitat. And we've got here a freshwater marsh. So we've got great big areas of open water that have been colonised by water-loving plants and trees, and they've started to grow through it. So you have lots of plants that are growing from the ground up through the water and others that are floating on the surface, creating a mat. So whatever you do, do not leave the boardwalk, because even in areas like behind me here where it looks like it's solid vegetation, the ground is just made up of sphagnum moss, which it could be that thick, or that thick, or not thick at all. So if you start to wander off the boardwalk and you're walking along, you could find a shallow bit in that sphagnum moss, fall through the sphagnum moss into this pond that might be 6 foot deep with another layer of 6 foot mud underneath it. And then you need to try and climb out, surrounded by a whole load of very soft plants, and it's very hard to get out. So make sure you stay on the boardwalk. But in fact, you are still overlying a floating raft of plants, which are floating over quite a deep pond. So this freshwater marsh is made out of mainly one species, which is this sphagnum moss. This can hold up to 20 times its own weight in water, and it allows an environment for all the other plants to live here. Now this plant gets all its nutrients from the rain because there's no soil underneath it, and it actually swaps the nutrients from the rain for acid. So it changes the environment so that it's a more acidic environment. Try placing your foot on top of the sphagnum moss and just give it a squeeze and see how the water squishes out of it. But don't put all your weight on it. Stay on that boardwalk. From the benches, follow the boardwalk all the way through the wet woodland, past the reeds, and then out through the other kissing gate. When you come off the boardwalk, you go through the wooden kissing gate. Make sure you keep staying to the left and you follow the side of the woodland along this path here to get to the other boardwalk that goes to the pond. If you want a quick way back, you can follow the path directly in front of you and it will take you to the sandy path that will take you straight back to the car park. But if you want to find where the other pond is, we need to follow round next to the trees. Out into the sunshine, then back into the wet wood. When you get to the sculpture, follow the viewing platform and have a look at the pond. Then back the way you came, back to the woods. Before you go along the second boardwalk to have a look at the pond down there, have a look at this fantastic wooden sculpture. Now the sculpture was actually put here when there was a tower or lookout made out of scaffolding behind it, and they built it so that you could have a tree top view all the way around the whole reserve. Unfortunately, the trees grew and the tower didn't, so it got to the point where all you could see were the insides of the trees. So they removed it because it wasn't very safe or very useful anymore. But this is a lovely example of what you might see in the reserve, and there's some nice identification of what you could listen for and see, and a bit about the history. So take a bit of time, and you can also do a rubbing as well. Again, if you've got paper on the back of your map or the back of your photos and a pencil, just lay it on top of the carving and then rub, and you can get some lovely impressions from some of these beautiful carvings here. When you get to this second boardwalk, make sure you stay on the boardwalk, because if you actually go off it, you'll actually be inside some water, some deep water in places, because this goes to another part of the bog that's been opened up into a pond. Now this pond area here can be great for birds, so you can do some bird watching here. Also, this time of year, you might just catch the end of the dragonfly season and the damselfly season, but you'll definitely see some fish in here, water boatmen, some water beetles as well, and if you're very quiet, you might see a heron crawling around in amongst the edges of the bushes trying to eat some of those fish. So a lovely place to have a little relax and watch the world go round. Carry on the same path after the sculpture until you come back onto the sandy path. Then follow the sandy path, then take a right through past the Scotch pine. Now you're going a bit off-road here, but just keep going towards the next path, then you'll find the dip. That's where you're heading for. Now this is the hardest spot to find, I think, on the reserve, because it's not really on a main path. But what it is a low point in amongst the dunes. So we have here a dip in the sand, and that dip goes so far down that it goes below the water table. Now the water table moves up and down the soil depending on how much rain there's been. So if you came here in the winter when it'd been raining a lot, this would look like a lake. Whereas now it hasn't been raining much and there's only the tiniest little puddle. But for this photo spot, if you don't find this one, that's fine. What I want you to do is try and find some wet part of the sand dune system. So the whole time you're looking around, keep your eye out for anything wet, because of course this is a very dry environment, because the sand doesn't trap the water infiltrates down, so you very rarely see any water. So look for the dips, anywhere that's dipping down, see if you can find some water. Another key giveaway is where there's lots of trees as well, lots of plants growing in a huddle, a bit like an oasis in the desert. So that black there is going to provide lots of water for all the plants that can't survive in this very barren environment where lots and lots of sand and no water. So they're located in those very click clumps where you've got that low point, where the water is closer to the surface. So if you don't want to try and find this one, don't worry, see if you can find any water on the whole of the nature reserve, which is in the sand dune system and which is fresh. So we don't want any puddles from the sea. From the dune slack, you can take any path you like as long as it is going further away from where you started. This one here is going parallel to the back of the dunes, and it's probably the main path that you can take. So just follow that, keep going until you get to the next gate. There's two options to go here. If you're feeling adventurous, you can go through this bottom gate here and follow the fence through the woods, or you can go round the woods. But inside there, sometimes it can get very wet. Follow either path through the gate and they will eventually combine together. And make sure you're looking either side of you, so there's beautiful trees to one side, beautiful flowers to the other side. Follow the footpath signs and keep going through the wooded areas until you start to see that you're coming into more of the yellow dunes again. So we're heading towards the beach now. The furthest eastern end of the sand dune system is the best place to see the beautiful flowers, the summer flowers. We've got some beautiful bloody cranesbill. We've also got a variety of orchids that live here, including the beautiful bee orchid, pyramidal orchid, southern marsh orchid. Have a really close look. As you can see, we have some beautiful pyramidal orchids hiding in amongst the bloody cranesbill and the dewberry. The bloody cranesbill is called because the leaves turn this lovely bright red colour a bit later on in the year, and it's called a cranesbill because if you look at its seed heads, they're meant to look a bit like a crane. But the best thing is it's beautiful bright purple flower heads. We've also got a lovely cushion of wild thyme here and some evening primrose, this yellow flower. We've also got common century. Beautiful kidney vetch, which is the food plant for the small blue butterfly, in amongst lots of wild strawberries. And if you're lucky, you might find a wild strawberry. Much smaller than the cultivated ones, but even tastier. Only eat if you're 100% sure you know what it is. Also keep out from some amazing invertebrates. We've got some tunnel web spiders here, and if you listen very carefully, you'll hear some crickets and grasshoppers in amongst the grass. Keep your eye open or your ear open for any crickets or grasshoppers. We have a huge range here. So this is a grasshopper, short antennae, and this is an immature because it doesn't have any wings, and it looks like a boy because it hasn't got an ovipositor. But you can find some bright pink ones here as well, meadow grasshoppers, and of course the great green bush cricket, which is much bigger, longer antennae. Those are carnivores, these are herbivores. The rest harrow, with its very sandy leaves, which if you feel them feel like suede, and this beautiful vetch or pea flower. They like it where it's very sandy, so in the floor dunes, and they've got long creeping structure and roots that were meant to stop the harrow. In the grey dunes we get a lot of lichen as well, which gives it its colour and its name. In the distance, this flat piece of ground here is the salt marsh, which is inundated by the sea. Now, used to be a huge big inlet. The sea would come up the Nicholaston Pill and would actually completely cover this and the whole of the back of the sand dune system until Thomas Menzel Talbot built his sea wall. So as we follow the path now, we're onto the yellow dunes, and we're going to head up onto the fore dunes where we start seeing those adapted plants again, maybe some sea holly, some marram grass, and then eventually we end up by the front of the dunes onto the beach and next to Nicholaston Pill. The furthest point that you're going to get to is right up here. This is Nicholaston Pill. Now, pill is the Welsh word that we use for when the sea and the rivers meet. So the river's been coming down here from the hills and it's now heading into the sea, and at this point the sea can actually come up the other way. So all this area here, this flat piece of ground, is going to be inundated, so covered in seawater at certain points in the tide. Now this doesn't get inundated very often, but when it does, all of this can be completely underwater. So the plants here are very different from the ones in the sand dunes because they need to be adapted to be able to be covered in salt water for some time of the day. So we get a very nice flat area because we get deposition when that water comes in as well. And if you look in the very far distance, you might be able to spot the sea wall. Now that sea wall, as I said, was put there by Thomas Mansell Talbot, and he put it there so that the sea didn't come in and flood this inlet that used to be along that whole flat area into the distance. And putting that seawall in changed the whole of the habitats that we've seen today. So freshwater marsh, that was created because of the seawall there. And then we've got our woodland, which is very wet. Again, that wouldn't have been the same if it wasn't for that seawall. Seawall now is not really very effective, but we've got some sluice gates which affect how much water comes out of the river. And up there, if you do want to carry on and explore, follow the Pill all the way up, cross some of these bridges, and up in the woods here in Nicholaston Woods, there's some adder banks where the adders hibernate and also bask. Some beautiful areas to explore there. And of course, if you carry on through Nicholaston Wood, you'll end up the other side of the river, and you can end up looking in Nicholaston Burrows, which is different to Oxwich Burrows, even though they're pretty much attached by the beach itself. But this is the furthest point we're going to go to today. We can now head back. You can head back straight along the beach, or if you want to go back the way you came, or if you want to do a longer circular walk, go through the woodland and then down through Nicholaston Woods, back along the beach all the way from the Great Tor. Now, right at the very back of the beach, before you get onto the sand dunes, you will find embryo dunes. Now these are only at the very far end, furthest away from the car park, because usually people come onto the beach and they sit at this point and sunbathe, and that destroys these embryo dunes. So we have some pioneer species here. So this is sea sandwort, and we might find some other prickly ones. So have a look and see how much like cactuses they are. Because there's no water, they need to hold on to that water that they get from the rain before it infiltrates down through the sand. This is sea rocket, another pioneer species that you only find on the embryo dunes at the far end of the beach. And then follow the beach all the way back to the car park where you started. As you're walking back along the beach, you might want to have a go at beach combing. So follow the strand line, have a look and see what's been washed up by the last tide. There's some amazing stuff that gets washed up. You could find shells, seaweed, crab molts, jellyfish, and also some amazing finds that you wouldn't think of. So maybe do some collecting as you go down, or you could finish off with a beach clean so that we leave the environment better than we found it. So follow that all the way back to the coal house where you started, the car park. On your way back along the beach, you can see your last treasure hunt post, which is the great big sand dune. This is the largest dune in the whole reserve. You can see it's also got a huge blowout. So why not climb up the top, get a nice panoramic view, or you could hide away from the wind in the middle of here and take your final selfie before you get back to the car. You're now ready to head out to Oxwich and complete your photo treasure hunt. Don't forget to go on to the Nature Days blog or the Gower Society Youth Facebook page to download the treasure map and the photo cues. Remember to bring your camera or your phone to take selfies at the different locations, then upload them onto Twitter, #rgower or #NatureDays so I can send you a certificate. Or you may want to upload one of your photos and enter it into the Gower Society photo competition with a chance to win a £25 Amazon voucher. Upload your favourite photo onto Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, #rgower, and then explain why it's your favourite or any anecdote or anything about it. Competition closes on July the 25th. Now if you've liked this video, then don't forget to look at the other Gower Society Youth ones on the Nature Days YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and subscribe so that you know about other events. Hopefully after the summer we'll be able to do some more face-to-face activities with Gower Society Youth. But in the meantime, this treasure hunt is going to be available for the whole of the summer, so feel free to use it and share it as much as you like and enjoy the Gower countryside.